I'm so pleased to welcome our speaker this year, Mazin Sidahmed, co-founder of Documented. So, for those of you who come to this regularly, you are perhaps used to our guest speaker standing up and saying, I remember my own fellowship year here at the University of Michigan, and when I sat in these seats as a fellow at my Hovey lecture. And Mazin is part of history because he was a fellow in our 2020-2021 fellowship class. He was not here on campus. He was part of our first pandemic class that was remote. And so he had a fellowship like no other. And I suspect like none in the history of this program going forward. I don't think there will be another year like 2020. We have a lot of alumni in the audience. I see many, many faces of people who sat through this event and spent time as fellows here. And oftentimes, fellows will say to me when I reference 2020, oh, I feel so bad for that class that they didn't get the experience of being here. And certainly, it is true that being on campus here is special. But the class that Mazin was in was actually the most intense experience I have had as director of this program. And the relationships were so profound, I think, because we were not physically together and because that class started in the true height of the pandemic when we really could not leave our homes, that our time logging on to Zooms with people that we saw regularly every week without our masks on was our lifeboat that year that got us through 2020 and the beginning of 2021. And so we had group meetings as fellows. We still brought speakers in. I remember when Sanjay Gupta came early on in the year to talk to the class about reporting on a pandemic. So we still did all of the things that we did in the normal fellowship except walking around campus and going to class and feeling old in the presence of 19-year-olds. That he was spared that particular humiliation. And then we had one-on-one meetings. And Mazin was one of the people who put his hand up first to say, can we check in regularly? And he came to the program as an entrepreneur. Where's Zahra? We have people who come to the program as entrepreneurs every year. And he was in a stage that I've seen people in often, where they are just past that point of getting funding and launching something, the honeymoon phase of, yes, I'm going to show it to, traditional journalism. I'm going to start a new thing. And then you start the new thing and you see the tail end of the money about to run out and the grant cycle's about to finish. And you're like, oh, I don't know anything about running an organization. I don't know anything about getting the next round of money. I don't know anything about human resources, about hiring and keeping a staff, about scaling what I'm doing. And you know what? I think that maybe I'm not going to make it. And then comes the fellowship. So he'll talk a little bit about that. Not much, but a little bit. And I mention that because if you are in journalism circles, Documented, the news organization that Mazin and his partner founded, is an extraordinary example that is talked about at journalism conferences around the country for being a change-making model in local news. Documented is a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to reporting with and for immigrant communities. It is not an accident that he is the former fellow that I asked to come speak to you this year. I did not know that the presidential debate was going to be on this night when I selected the date, but I'm glad you are all here because I promise you that a lot of what you're going to hear tonight will be variations on really disturbing national politics related to immigration. As I stand here today, my own hometown of Springfield, Ohio, is in national news as the hotbed of disinformation about Haitian immigrants who are starting to take up residence in the town that I grew up in. Every time I pick up Twitter, every time my phone rings, it's one of my relatives or friends in the past couple of days telling me something horrific that is being spread about the new residents of our town. And so when I say that documented reports with and for immigrant communities, and that is a radical new way to approach local news and one that we should be thinking about as we create a new news ecosystem, I really want you all to leave here thinking about it today. And when you're thinking about supporting local news organizations, think about what it means to be local and what it means to serve a community, and think about some of the things that Mazin is going to talk about. Mazin worked previously at The Guardian in New York during the 2016 U.S. elections, where he covered a variety of issues, including surveillance and criminal justice, as well as the rise of hate crimes following the election. He left The Guardian to go to a mobile innovation lab to sort of leave the traditional structure of the newsroom to start thinking about how we retool news for a new digital reality and new ways of getting information to audiences. He started his career writing for the Daily Star in Beirut. He reported on the Syrian refugee crisis, weapon transfers to Lebanon, and the plight of migrant domestic workers. As a 2021 Knight Wallace Fellow, his project that he wrote on paper to be accepted to the fellowship, I say it like that specifically, was about the role of local police in federal immigration enforcement. And it is not to say that they've done stunning work in this area, but what he did with the fellowship was so much more. And I'd like to think that we played some role in all of the great work that Documented has done since he was in the fellowship. So with that, I will turn things over to Mazin.
I appreciate it. Wow. That was amazing. Thank you. Such an honor to be here with you all today and to hear these amazing fellow introductions. You're going to be doing that 6,000 more times. So really you're going to have everyone else's memorized in a few weeks. So just get used to it. Like Lynette said, I feel bad that I can't impart some wisdom. I feel like most Hovey lectures start with the lecturer talking about what it's like to live here and all the things they did on campus and how they did nothing for the year and it was beautiful and all these different things. But I don't have any of that to share, unfortunately. I did live in Windsor, Ontario, just across the border. So I can talk a little bit about winter here for the folks that are not from the area, from hotter countries. However bad you think it is, it's worse. Just really get yourself mentally prepared. I think I moved from the UK to Canada, and I think the best piece of advice a Canadian gave me was don't try and look cute in the winter. Don't think about fashion, try to look cute, just bundle up many layers and really embrace it. But I'm really excited for you all to go on this journey. So as Lynette said, our year was entirely remote. However, this year was still incredibly special. We would meet for our seminars every week, and as some of the lockdowns got worse and worse, the fellowship became a bright spot for all of us. We had a fellows happy hour once per month on Zoom, and they were often my most exciting social activity of the month. I think you all can remember that time. We formed a really special bond that year, and I'm really excited for all of you incoming fellows. Going on this journey together really creates a unique connection between all of you. We did eventually come together in 2022 with the following year who were also remote for a joint graduation that was really beautiful, and I got to see and experience this very special place. This institution gave me a lot personally. I came into this fellowship, as Lynette mentioned, at a crossroads in my career, where I wasn't really sure where I was going next. Having the space and support to navigate that complexity felt like a tremendous privilege. Lynette has been an incredible mentor and advisor to me and so many of us former fellows. With her guidance, I was really able to have a breakthrough in a difficult transition in my career. I ended my year with a renewed faith in journalism and a lot of energy to dedicate towards leading a newsroom. So I was incredibly excited when Lynette invited me to come here and speak to you all today about this little old topic called immigration. For context, as Lynette mentioned, a few years before coming into the fellowship, I started a publication called Documented. We are a non-profit news outlet that covers New York City's immigrants and the policies that affect their lives. We were born in 2018 at the height of the family separation crisis. My co-founder, Max Siegelbaum, and I felt that there was a profound lack of local news that was equipped to cover the generational shifts in immigration that we were witnessing across cities at the time. This was mainly because local news organizations have been hollowed out, and we'll discuss more about the local news landscape throughout this talk. We also felt that there was a structural issue in the way we covered immigration as journalists. The problem is twofold. First, immigration often treats immigrants as subjects to be written about rather than an audience to be written for. Second, much of the coverage focuses on policy debates and political controversies, overlooking the day-to-day realities and practical information needs of immigrant communities. This approach creates a disconnect between the journalism being produced and the people most affected by the issues. It often results in coverage that fails to serve immigrant communities, it perpetuates stereotypes, and glosses over the nuances that make for an informed public conversation. I felt this when I was a reporter in Lebanon. I would often go to the border with Syria and speak to Syrian refugees. I'd spend the day hearing really heartbreaking and harrowing stories from people. Then I would go back to my office in Beirut and I'd write a story in a language that they could not read. That relationship always felt extractive to me. The target audience of immigration reporting is not the immigrants themselves. We established Documented to chart a new way forward, where the immigrants at the center of our stories would also be the readers of our stories. In order to accomplish that, we've built a newsroom that listens first. We ask our readers what news they would find most useful in their day-to-day lives, where they get their information, and how they feel about how they see themselves reflected in the existing news ecosystem. Simple questions like, where do you get your news? Or more complex ones like, if you had your own personal reporter, what would you ask them to investigate? That's actually a question we got from some folks here in Detroit called Outlier Media, who I'm going to speak about later as well. And we don't just publish our reporting, we make it accessible. And we go the extra mile to make sure it lands in the hands of people who are most impacted. We publish our news in Spanish, Chinese, Haitian Creole, and English. Of course, we publish news on our website, but we also distribute through our WhatsApp news service, a WeChat publication, and a Nextdoor account, because this is where people are getting their news today. Standing here in front of so many people who care about their local communities, I can tell you that I believe with my whole heart that what we've built at Documented is the future of local news. A future where people have access to information about things that actually impact their daily lives in the language that suits them best. We found that writing for immigrant communities, rather than just about them, not only serves these communities better, but it is also key to improving our broader public discourse on immigration. When I was in the fellowship, actually, it was 2020, end of 2020, I was really surprised after Trump lost the election how many of my colleagues, journalists and editors in our industry, were genuinely concerned about the future of our publication. People would say to me, what are you going to write about? Immigration, it's over. It's been solved. There's nothing left to cover. Like, Trump is gone, it's done. Some news organizations went as far as to disband their immigration teams and reassign their reporters. We had a call with an editor from another publication who said, so what now? Is there a future for you guys? Despite these predictions, immigration has not only persisted, it has become even more central to our national discourse. It has become a well-defined pillar of polarization. One only has to turn on their television to get a feel for this. The first attack ad that Donald Trump levied at Vice President Kamala Harris focused on her record on immigration. This year, nearly $250 million has been spent on immigration-focused attack ads. Both parties are attempting to be seen as tougher than the other on immigration. I imagine that there are people here today who are acutely aware of the role immigration is playing in this election as it is playing out on your TV screens. I live in New York, not a battleground state, but here in Michigan, I imagine you're seeing ads flooding your TV screens every day around both parties trying to seem tougher on this issue. Michigan ranks as the second largest state in terms of political advertising spending, and a large chunk of that money is focused on immigration-related messages. And I have a feeling immigration is going to come up tonight at the debates. My co-founder and I have been covering migration issues globally long before we started Documented. We were always aware that the former president had not invented this issue. Immigration is the defining issue of our time. This topic is deciding elections all over the world. In the UK, France, Germany, it is the issue separating political parties and driving voter sentiment. Over 100 million people are on the move today, more than at any other time since World War II. According to the UN's Refugee Agency, the number has increased yearly for the past 10 years. And the main drivers of migration, conflict, violence, climate change, are not going anywhere. Regardless of what happens in November, immigration will remain the issue that defines our political discourse and therefore our collective reality for the foreseeable future. So why do people think that immigration will be over in 2020? I think this limited view is reflective of the way this issue is covered. Immigration in the US is mainly covered through the lens of horse race politics, a political football that's bouncing back and forth between one party to the other. One statistic on the scorecard that measures the popularity of a given candidate. Let me share a few recent headlines from national publications to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. I'll try and do my newsreader voice here. On immigration, Harris and Democrats walk a delicate and harder line. Or Trump event at wall Obama built highlights unkept promise. Bonus points if you can guess which outlets those are from. At Documented, we decided to abandon this approach and speak directly to the immigrants themselves. We let the issues that they prioritize help us decide what is and isn't essential to cover, which builds for a richer and more diverse perspective on the issue. Since 2020, we have seen American opinion on immigration become the most hostile it has ever been. According to a March Gallup poll, 55% of Americans think immigration should be decreased. You have to go back almost 25 years to see numbers greater than this. Up until 2020, views on immigration had actually been trending in the opposite direction. We had seen a steady rise in the Americans who felt that immigration should be increased. In the past 4 years, that has precipitously declined. The word invasion, previously relegated to the most anti-immigrant corners, has now become commonplace in political advertising. Today, I'd like us to unpack what has happened over the past few years and what role did our coverage of immigration play in getting us here. To illustrate how these national trends are playing out at the local level, let's zoom in on New York City, and where we can see how American opinions on immigration are shifting essentially because of the way immigration is being covered and being treated by those in political leadership. As many of you are aware, in 2022, Texas Governor Greg Abbott began Operation Lone Star, a program to bus migrants who had crossed the border to so-called sanctuary cities. Now, the term sanctuary cities often does a lot more legwork than it actually means in practice. It simply means that local agencies don't cooperate with federal law enforcement, federal immigration law enforcement. It doesn't offer undocumented immigrants any kind of meaningful protections. It can't because immigration law is enforced federally. So ICE could still arrest someone in a sanctuary city. But these buses were sent to Chicago, Denver, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and New York City. In New York, this caused pandemonium at the Port Authority bus terminal, where migrants began arriving daily. This policy was similar to one carried out in the Jim Crow era. White supremacists from the group Citizens Council conducted reverse freedom rides, where they would send black people from southern states, Louisiana, Georgia, and Alabama, to northern ones, mainly as a cheap way to draw press attention. The first of these was sent from New Orleans to the Port Authority bus terminal. But migrants' arrival in New York collided with another issue, homelessness in New York. It had reached the highest level since the 1930s. The shelter system was under tremendous strain. 45,000 people were living in New York City shelters before migrants started getting bused. And the vast majority spent over a year, often 2 years, living in shelter before they found somewhere to live. At the center of what would become called the migrant crisis in New York was a 1979 law that guaranteed the right to shelter. This meant that every migrant arriving in New York City was entitled to a bed at the expense of the local government. This is something that Governor Abbott had not designed or anticipated, but it played perfectly into his hands. Over the last 2 years, only a fraction of the 200,000 migrants who have come to New York City was sent by the Texas governor. The majority heard about the possibility to get free housing and came of their own accord, sometimes aided by Democratic mayors in other cities. As documented, when migrants started arriving, we focused our coverage on 2 levels: reporting for the migrants themselves and covering the broader systemic issues. Our first responsibility is to serve the migrants who are arriving. We run a WhatsApp news service where we distribute a newsletter once per week in Spanish with a roundup of news we think will be relevant to low-wage migrants who don't speak English. It's also a place where our readers can speak directly to our Spanish-speaking communities correspondent, Romel Ojeda. People started getting our phone number through networks of other travelers. We began receiving messages saying things like, "I'm heading to New York. Where can I find shelter when I arrive?" We began publishing content that would be useful to migrants when they got here, explaining us on how to navigate New York City. We published booklets that explained the basics of what it means to live in the city and distributed them at shelters where migrants were staying. Based on these insights and accounts of migrants themselves, we were able to cover the broader systemic response. Our goal was to provide sober coverage of the city's response and handling of the issue alongside the experience of migrants. We wrote about people's living conditions in the shelters. We spoke to dozens of migrants who shared their insights into what life was like in the shelter system. One issue that arose was food wastage. A lot of the food people were served was either expired or not culturally appropriate, so it ended up being thrown out. To combat this, the mayor proposed giving the migrants debit cards so that they could buy their own food, as opposed to the city losing millions of dollars on wasted food from vendors. This sparked outrage in New York City. It was one of the most divisive issues. Everybody had an opinion on this. People felt like the migrants were receiving handouts that other New Yorkers weren't entitled to. Our responsibility was clear. People needed facts and nuance. So we published a series of stories explaining the proposal. The mayor's contracting process, if anyone knows anything about Eric Adams, was dubious, to say the least. So our reporting team got an exclusive interview with the CEO of the company that was responsible for handling the debit cards. They asked questions about how he was able to secure the contract and whether or not his previous relationship with the mayor played a role in him getting it. At the same time, we published explainers on the debit cards themselves. So we run a Nextdoor account. I don't know if anyone here uses Nextdoor. It's not usually the best place for how do I say this, polite conversation. It can sometimes get a little bit heated on there. So we were seeing on Nextdoor that a lot of the conversations around the debit cards was quite heated, and people were spreading a lot of different misinformation about it. So we mainly are on Nextdoor to engage with Caribbean New Yorkers who live in South Brooklyn. And there was a lot of tension between migrants arriving and immigrants who had lived in the city for a long time as well. So we saw this information getting shared and consumed. We decided to publish an explainer on Nextdoor as well as on Instagram, and we really engaged in the comments. By engaging in the comments and their questions and concerns, we provided a more nuanced, on-the-ground perspective. We were able to inject more factual, less sensational information into the public conversation, in turn leading to a healthier discourse around the policy. This created more room for solving the problem of food wastage instead of catastrophizing it. While much of the national coverage that has descended on this issue focuses on political battles and shocking headlines, Our approach allows us to uncover and report on the complex realities of these situations. This, in turn, provides the public with a more accurate and comprehensive view to allow them to shape their perspectives on this issue. The way immigration has been covered is symptomatic of a larger issue affecting journalism, the collapse of local news. Lynette is someone who's very passionate about this and has probably spoken to you all about it extensively. But this decline actually has a profound impact on how we understand and discuss immigration. New York City has not been immune to the same issues that have affected the rest of the country. The New York Daily News is a shadow of its former self. Now hedge fund owned, it's declined from the 90s when there were 1,500 people in the union to today when there are only 54. The New York Times has fluctuated in and out of investing in its local coverage. AM New York has significantly reduced its local footprint. Newsday shut down their New York bureau. A digital startup, DNA Info, was shut down by its billionaire founder over a labor dispute. The vast network of community and ethnic newspapers in the city are on their last legs. And in Michigan, you're experiencing this as well. 30% of local news outlets in this state have shut down over the past 20 years. The effects this has on our democracy are devastating. This is a large reason for the polarization that we're seeing in society today. The annihilation of most local news sources has created a fragmented information ecosystem and led people to no longer understand and feel tethered to their local communities. There's a range of researches on the consequences this has for local government accountability as well. People begin to see issues like immigration through a national lens. The conversations around the issue deteriorate as the focus no longer becomes how is this playing out in my local community, but rather obsessions with the border and sensational headlines. National news outlets were driving the coverage of migrants arriving in New York City, with little context or investment in the local dynamics. But we do have one local newspaper that has remained relatively strong, despite the decline of its competitors, the Rupert Murdoch-owned New York Post. Insulated by its corporate parent company, it remains incredibly influential over this current administration. Its coverage of migrants, I'm going to need some water for this. Okay. Its coverage of migrants arriving in the city has been fear and terror. I'll pull some of the headlines from their front pages, which the Post also shares on Twitter to their 3.1 million followers. Migrant crime wave. Migrant gangs of New York. Monster, with a picture of a mugshot. Open border killer. Criminal migrants on shoplifting spree assault cops. Most are let go. The Post says, deport them. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, and Governor Kathy Hochul have followed a similar line to that of the Post. This issue will destroy New York City, Adams said. The Democratic Governor Hochul has become a leading voice for increasing border security. The result is that New Yorkers' views on immigration have also shifted. 6% of people who live in New York City agreed with the mayor that migrants would destroy New York, according to a recent poll. A poll from last year showed that only 38% of New Yorkers said that the city should accept migrants and work to assimilate them. A far cry from give me you're tired, you're poor. While this may feel unprecedented, it's important that we view it through the lens of the city's rich history on immigration. This reveals some striking parallels. Today, on the corner of Tompkins Square Park in the East Village, you can see men praying on cardboard boxes and listening to music, outside of a food kitchen that's run by the Trinity Lower East Side Church. The church itself was established almost 200 years ago, during a large wave of Irish migration. Many of them were also homeless and relied on charity from the church. Today, we're seeing West African migrants from Mauritania, Guinea, and Senegal arrive in the city for the first time. There was previously no large Venezuelan community in New York. We're witnessing its birth. I spoke to the leadership of the United Neighborhood Houses, a group that oversees a network of settlement houses in New York City that support low-wage people across Manhattan. One of the directors said something I found incredibly profound. New York City's history is basically a series of migration crises. The settlement houses were established in the late 1800s to provide support services to the European immigrants who were arriving in the city. In the 1950s, immigrants from the Caribbean islands started to arrive in New York City. In 1993, a boat landed on the shore of the Rockaways Beach carrying 286 Chinese immigrants, a crisis that catalyzed a shift in immigration policy. Much of today's reporting lacks this historical perspective, which contributes to the perception of immigration as a new and overwhelming problem. By writing for immigrants and including this historical context, we can provide a more accurate and balanced view to the broader public. Understanding this history of immigration in New York reminds us that our approach to covering these issues needs to evolve. Just as the city adapted to groups of newcomers, our journalism must adapt to serve both immigrant communities and inform the broader public discourse. Rommel, who I mentioned earlier, often says, "We don't have a migrant crisis in New York, we have a housing crisis." New York needs people. We've seen a huge domestic outmigration in New York. In the first 2 years of the pandemic, the city lost hundreds of thousands of people and was struggling to recover in 2022. The labor market was also incredibly tight when Abbott began busing people. It wasn't the people that were the problem. It shone a light on an exasperating housing affordability crisis. If we want to see a healthier democracy and less divided communities, we need to reconsider this cycle of immigration coverage. Our role as journalists is to inform the public on the complexities of these issues, while providing the basis for healthy, nuanced policy discussions. That's the future we're creating at Documented. There is a huge need for this work across the country. Take Michigan, for instance. This is an incredibly diverse state. 1 in 10 people speaks a language other than English at home. Beyond the storied Middle Eastern and Arab communities in the state, we also have large Spanish-speaking communities here and Indian and Chinese immigrant communities here. Who is creating news for them? Despite all the challenges facing local news, there is a silver lining. The collapse of traditional local news has created an opportunity to reimagine journalism, including in how we cover immigration. Today, Documented is one of several local news organizations that have been born across the country over the past few years. Our goal is not simply to fill the hole that was left by newsrooms that existed there previously, but rather to reimagine what news is and who it is for. We are rewriting the contract between our news outlets and the communities that have been historically harmed by our industry. One of those newsrooms is not far from here. In Detroit, created by a U of M alum, Sarah Alvarez, Outlier Media is at the forefront of this movement. Sarah created a model for local news that is responsive to the information needs of people of Detroit, not to the things that sell the most ads. Her work has been an inspiration to me and to many people across the country. I'd like to conclude with a call to action to the journalists in the room. I think it is imperative to journalists to be the future entrepreneurs of news. I believe that we are uniquely situated to build newsrooms that center their business models on what is beneficial to our readers and not to the interests of advertisers. We cannot forfeit this space to Silicon Valley, political parties who want to create pink slime sites, and local billionaires who want to wield more influence in their community. Before starting Documented, I was in a newsroom that was going through round after round of layoffs, and I was incredibly demoralized about the state of our industry. My journey building this organization, being in partnership with newsrooms around the country who are reimagining this work, has truly reinvigorated me. I've made my fair share of mistakes, and it's not been easy. Just to be real, it's hard to do this. But I've never been more excited about the future of our space. Please consider it. We need you in this movement. And finally, to the remainder of people in this audience, please find a local newsroom to support. A local newsroom that speaks to you, that you feel like is doing something in your community. The future of our democracy depends on it. Thank you.
So that was extraordinary. I hope it gave you a lot to think about as you go home and absorb politics tonight and for the next few weeks before the election and after. We're going to go to Q&A now, but I want to start by sometimes I think when someone like Mazin talks about new models of local news that's very community-driven, for people who consume a lot of national news or for reporters who have made their careers in national and international news, it's hard to imagine how you both do some of the things that he is talking about doing that are reaching out to communities, and also the kind of journalism that gets the sort of the award journalism, right? The investigative accountability journalism. One of the most extraordinary things the Documented has done, last year they published, driven by, I'll ask Mazin to talk about it, this question that he said, if you had your own reporter, what would you have them report on? And what he kept hearing was wage theft. I'm a day laborer and they're holding my pay. Mazin and his partner Max spent 4 years on this topic and produced a database documenting wage theft in New York. And I just would love for you to talk a little bit about it before we go to questions.
Yeah, it was very surprising because it was 2019 when we did this survey, and it was really the height of ICE arrests. You know, ICE was like the main immigration story in the news at the time. And we went to different community groups to speak to their members, to ask them what they wanted to see news about. And we were expecting to hear things about immigration enforcement, but every single place we went, people wanted to know more about wage theft. So we actually thought it'd be really straightforward that the Department of Labor would just give us the names of all the companies that had been convicted of wage theft, and we could publish a database that workers could use to see who are the bad employers to watch out for. But it was Cuomo's Department of Labor, and they really just hated all FOIA requests, any kind of request from journalists, period. So we ended up in a 4-year lawsuit with the Department of Labor that ended last year. But we were able to publish this database that has every wage thief in New York State. And it's been amazing to see the kind of many layers. So workers use it, labor lawyers use it to kind of find out if there's someone they're about to sue as a history. But also just like folks who maybe haven't been victims of wage theft, they look up their zip code and they're like, man, I knew that restaurant was shady. Like, they definitely were stealing wages. Or you're like, oh, I love that restaurant. I can't believe they're also stealing wages. So it's kind of broadened the conversation around wage theft as well.
Yeah, I just did not. You can look it up. I hope you'll all go home and look up Documented. When you search for it, search Documented New York, because there are a lot of things called Documented. So search Documented NY. It will take you to their website, and it's really worth spending some time with. So we want to open this up to questions. We've got Alexis here and Kate here, and we've got time for several questions. So why don't we start here, Kate?
Hello. Thank you for what you said, and thank you for what you're doing. I want to precede that because I want to dig deeper on the broader issue, I think, of what your remarks mean for the future journalism. You talk about moving from writing about, stopping writing about immigration and writing for immigrants or with and for immigrants. But does that just lead us down a path of now we're going to have another journalism source that writes for and with xenophobes and nationalists, and it just divides us even more? Or is it just accepting the fact that, quite frankly, it's already happened, and so you're just offering the counterpoint and just accept that journalism is now going to be in the partisan fight? Or is it journalism becoming advocacy? Where do we go with this?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I appreciate it. So I think the thing that I learned in starting this site is that the way that we're trained to think about what is news is that there's some sort of objective idea of what everybody considers to be news, that everybody consumes and wants to consume the same types of stories. So when we started Documented with this notion of how do we write for immigrant communities, we were reporting and thinking about stories in the same way that we've always thought about stories. And we just thought I thought the only reason immigrants weren't reading my stories is that they weren't translated into the languages that were suitable for them. So when we started, we did this series of great stories that were having a lot of impact amongst English speakers and on the policy level. But when we translated them into Spanish, our peers in journalism were giving us hand clap emojis on Twitter and saying we were doing great work. But when we looked at the analytics, no one was reading them. So the actual news that people want to consume is different based on their information needs, like the things that they've experienced in their lives and the things that they want. And we as journalists are trained to actually just create news for a very small subset of society, an affluent, highly educated subset of society. So if you actually want to reach and engage with people, different types of people in this country, then you do need to create specific intentional strategies. And I think anyone who's creating a product would also think like that. You don't just create an app or any product thinking that everybody is going to consume it. Everybody has their unique needs, and you have to think about how you can deliver something that is going to be useful to them.
Wait, is this on? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I think your speech is really inspiring, and I had many questions, and I try to roll them together. The first one is about the impact of local journalism, like documented. And I know that you have targeted audiences, and especially in the immigrant community. But what I perceive that you guys try to do is to maybe influence and create an alternative discourse in this public dialogue about immigration. But how do you combat misinformation or disinformation spread by big conglomerates like the New York Post, because their circulation size is way bigger than the target size of documented, right? So that's the first question. And that tied into my second question, was about the business model of local journalism. So if you don't prioritize advertising revenue and you don't charge your readers, where would the money come from to sustain that service-driven, solution-based journalism going forward? And then that tied to my third question, which is about the future of journalists. I'm a faculty member at EMU. I teach journalism and advise journalism students. Often the time, I face the challenge of advising students where to go after graduation. Local journalism and local newsrooms are shrinking. But as a fresh graduate, you guys probably know better, it is really hard for you to jump from fresh graduate to any major organizations at the national level. So a lot of them end up doing freelance work and then end up doing freelancing for a few years. So if local journalism doesn't have a future, then future journalists doesn't have a future. So how do we work on that?
These are all the things that keep us.
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah, you've hit on all the major problems. Yeah, I think the last point is such a good point, because it was kind of like the career, even when I was leaving journalism school, that career path, there was, a lot of the professors were like, start at the local paper and then you go to like a regional paper and then you graduate into the new, that's dead, that doesn't really exist anymore. There are folks that are trying to combat it, Report for America and others are like trying to create programs to kind of recreate that. They have their own issues as well. But I think that kind of question about the profession and the careers of journalists is still in transition right now. And I honestly don't have a great answer for that. I have been really humbled to see that a lot of young journalists really have taken to this style of journalism and really love the idea, especially young journalists of color, love the idea of being able to write for people that look like them, people in their families, actually seeing that they're consuming the news that they're producing, as opposed to my experiences where I was often writing about my community for a predominantly white audience. So it's been really impactful for me and I think for a lot of young journalists coming in. On the business model, it's a great question. I think that sustainability in news is kind of like the big thing that people are trying to figure out. We do believe that philanthropically supported model makes sense when you're trying to reach communities that don't have a lot of capital that need this information. There are a lot of other actors in New York that they don't care about journalism, but they care about these communities having good, high quality information. So we've been building partnerships with other actors in the city who are really invested in the same thing and are aligned. But really explaining to them the independence of journalism and the fact that we're different maybe to some of their other traditional grantees. That's been the work that we've been doing and educating folks around that. But we see a lot of great potential for growing in that space. And there are some advertisers actually who want to reach the communities that we serve on our terms. So the New York City government has a program where 50% of the New York City ad budget goes to community media. So media that's serving low-wage communities or marginalized communities. And really it's aligned with what we're doing because a lot of the things being promoted are government programs that these communities can utilize. So it doesn't feel like we have to change our coverage to kind of bring in that type of advertising dollars. So that's the kind of pie that we're building towards, but it's going to take a lot of creativity to figure out this model.
And so another hand in that same area.
I'm curious of the extent of meaningful statistics as to numbers of immigrants and what happens to them, how large the programs are that provide debit cards or things of that sort, and to see how meaningful they are in the context of the larger society.
Yeah. So in New York City, there's about 60,000 people in the shelter system who are considered asylum seekers. They're not all asylum seekers, but they're people that basically came to the city through busing. So that has, beyond the capacity of the shelter system in New York. So New York City has actually had to create temporary shelters, take over gyms, take over schools, different areas in the city, and it's created a lot of different tensions. The number, as I said, is really brought about by the issue with housing. So we speak to a lot of migrants who have found work, maybe they have a work permit, but they just can't afford to find anywhere to live, even on a salary of a delivery worker or bringing in a few $1,000s a month. So that kind of tension has been really huge. The debit card program didn't survive the New York Post pile-on that happened afterwards. And there were legitimate concerns, like I said, with the contracting process. A lot of the contracts that have come out in response to the shelter system have raised a lot of alarm bells amongst a lot of journalists, including reporters that documented.
Jess?
Can you expand just a bit on the systemic world factors that are affecting migration all across our country? What's going on globally that is influencing this, from corrupt governments to all the desperation that you see? What's going on that's influencing it, and what do we need to understand about that?
Yeah. Well, we've seen more coups in Africa in the last year than we had in a long time. Destabilization across the African continent right now is a lot worse than it has been for some time. From Sudan, it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. Sub-Saharan Africa generally is just going through a particularly difficult period. You have the war in Ukraine and continued conflicts in the Middle East. But I think one of the main drivers that is going to persist beyond maybe a situation we have right now with conflict in different places is climate change. Climate change is really driving a lot of migration from Central America, where desertification and farmers who previously lived in communities are no longer able to sustain themselves because of changes to the climate. So I think that is going to be a persistent factor. And even the IOM in the Migration Compact last year controversially included climate change as one of the main drivers of migration.
Hi, my background's in ethnic media, and so I've noticed in recent years there's a lot more talk about communities journalism and local reporting, but sometimes communities don't sit right within, I'm going to say, geographic boundaries, especially with ethnic communities. Like in Michigan, if you wanted to do the Chinese community, it would be across 3 cities, and Indian community, 3 other cities, and we in the community know this. But it's not necessary. How would you expand your model, if you've thought about this, to a national scale, where you're talking about where you're talking to immigrants and folks of color, but not constricted by geography?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I know Gary Pierre from the Haitian Times is one of my mentors, and he's done this for 25 years in a really beautiful way. Just he saw that there was a huge Haitian diaspora forming in the United States in the 90s and wanted to cover this moment in history and built just an incredible site that captures the Haitian experience here. And I think when you do a national site, a lot of what folks want is what's going on back home. So he covers what's happening in Haiti as well as that. I think for us, it is super important to be grounded in place. Our vision really is that U.S. cities are changing, that what we're building is for the future of American cities. American cities are getting more diverse. Immigrants, as I said, are going to continue to move to the U.S. cities. They're driving most population growth in the U.S. is coming from immigrants. So how do we build a news site that covers a city but is reflective of the diversity of that city? And we think it has to be multilingual, and it really has to be grounded in place.
First, I want to say congratulations on what you've been able to accomplish with Documented. It's absolutely incredible. My name is Loren. I'm from Bridge, Detroit. So the kind of work you're doing, writing for migrants, we write for residents of Detroit. And so Detroit has always been a city of migrants and immigrants throughout history. Things are pretty drastically changing right now. A lot of those folks who got bused into New York and Chicago and those other cities in the Northwest and Midwest have ended up in Detroit. Yeah. And so as for our organization, obviously we need to expand our definition of Detroiters, and it needs to include these new migrants and refugees that are coming in. So I would just like to ask you for some suggestions, practical. I mean, we know that it's about showing up, it's about listening, it's about uplifting voices. But aside from that, and aside from focusing on translation services and information in different languages, what are some practical things that folks in newsrooms can do to make sure we're properly reporting on and being respectful and uplifting these community voices? I say this specifically because we have a refugee and immigrant resources event coming up on October 16th. So these are things that I will take back for sure.
That's so cool. I'm so happy to hear that. I think you're doing the part that I was going to mention, which is that actually take action after you listen. So I hear about a lot of folks who want to better reach migrant communities where they're at, and maybe they'll do a survey and then nothing will happen afterwards. And that really breaks trust with communities. People feeling like you're listening, but not actually, you're taking their time. You know, low-wage people are incredibly busy. You know, they have tough jobs, and there's time is really a difficult resource. And so people take the time out to talk to you about what's going on and what they would like to see, making sure that you're actually taking action afterwards. And it sounds like doing an event like that, and which I imagine was in response to things that you heard people needed, is a huge way to do that. And trying to engage with folks that have some trust in the community and understand from them ways in which you might want to step into the community as well. I think really taking the time and knowing that this is a long-term investment. You know, people might see something like the migrants arriving in buses in the news and feel like they can do a quick turnaround thing. I think you really have to ask yourself, am I in this for the long haul? And if you're not, then maybe this isn't the right story for you. Right. Yeah. That's terrible. Wow.
We have time for one more question here.
Thank you very much for coming today. It's a pleasure to hear a true British accent versus my faux British accent that you all will turn into when you've been here.
Don't say that. Oh, no.
So it's said that the children of immigrants do so much better than their parents. How could you involve the children of immigrants in your mission? And do they want the same stories that their parents do?
What a great question. Yeah, I really love that question. It's something that I think about a lot, actually. So we had a lot of different directions we could take this site. And I think what we decided was that the people that were least served by the existing media ecosystem in New York City were people that didn't speak English as a first language. They couldn't access the existing media infrastructure. As bad as it was, they couldn't access even that. So they were relying mainly on family members or, you know, publications that were maybe covering things back home. So how could we engage them, give them news and information about the city that is useful to them? There's an amazing outlet in Minnesota called Sahan Journal that is kind of more aligned with what you're describing. So they're writing almost what I envision to be the New York Times of the future, where folks who are maybe children of immigrants don't necessarily, they're highly educated, affluent, they read the Times, but they don't necessarily feel seen and represented by the New York Times. There's a new generation, I think, of publications that could be created to speak to that growing class of maybe, like you said, young professionals, people who are maybe somewhat affluent, somewhat educated, but don't feel represented by the old guard of media. There's a different type of publication you could create to serve them. And it's not what we do, but I think it's incredibly valuable.
That was such a great question to end on. And I think, stay here.
Okay.
It's such a great question to end on because I think that, you know, one of the things that we do with all of our talks here every year, we take on one facet of journalism. And hopefully by coming every year, by engaging in these conversations, that, and you know, when we're standing here, we are also talking about the strength and health of our democracy. And to address the strength and health of our democracy and all of the pressures on it now, we need people to be trying multiple things in journalism, to be looking at who's being missed in various cities and states and regions, and trying, and like the tech community, willing to change course when something's not working, and iterate and try again and listen to people's feedback, because journalism is too important for us to sacrifice it to the hedge funds and the people who are trying to kill us. So with that, Mazin, thank you so much. This was extraordinary. So you keep trying to leave, and I'm just not going to let you. So your name will be added. You know, I think you've seen this hanging in Wallace House. This is again our 37th Hovey lecture. Your name will be added to this esteemed list of speakers. And Charles, I know I ask you every year, why a bowl? Because so we the Hovey Bowl. I don't know why Charles decided that it should be a bowl, but it's a Rose Bowl. It's yes. Hey, all right, I like that. But the tradition started before our industry started going through rapid challenges and disruptions, and so you've heard me say to people, "This is to hold your tears." and to keep you in journalism to fight another day.
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. So we have